Have you ever truly stopped to ask why your name was forcibly changed, why your entire history was methodically erased, and why your very image was rewritten by those who oppressed you? And consider this deeply, why? Out of all the peoples on this planet, were you the one told that your story began not with glory, but with the clanking of chains? I urge you to stay with me because the truth I am about to reveal has been masterfully hidden in plain sight for countless generations. Prepare yourself. Because by the conclusion of this presentation, the way you perceive your own identity and the Holy Bible itself will be fundamentally and irreversibly transformed. Let's address the profound and uncomfortable reality that most modern churches consistently sidestep. You were never created to remain in a state of spiritual and historical slumber. And at this very moment, something truly ancient is beginning to stir and awaken. This is an event that was prophesied thousands of years ago. It's a truth that scholars have whispered about in private circles but never dared to teach openly. It's a revelation that sends shockwaves of terror through the very systems of power that were constructed upon your confusion. Because here is a fundamental principle of power. When a people finally remember who they truly are, the artificial structures of control inevitably collapse. Allow me to pose a question to you. Why is it that black people dispersed across Africa, America, the Caribbean, and Europe are all at the exact same time beginning to ask the very same fundamental questions about their identity? Why is this happening now of all times? Why is there a sudden and massive explosion in the popularity of DNA and ancestry tests within our communities? Why are ancient pre-colonial maps of Africa suddenly re-emerging into the public consciousness? And why are so many people walking away from the traditions of the church, yet holding tighter than ever to their faith in the Most High? This is not a series of coincidences. This is prophecy activating and unfolding in real time. The Bible explicitly warned that this day of questioning would come. But here is the critical piece of information they conveniently left out. The Bible doesn't just speak about the ancient nation of Israel. It speaks directly to a people who were prophesied to experience a profound amnesia, completely forgetting who they were. In Hosea chapter 4 verse 6, it is written, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." Pay close attention to the wording. It does not say a lack of faith, nor does it mention a lack of prayer. The destruction stems from a lack of knowledge. So you must ask yourself, knowledge of what precisely? The knowledge of their true identity, the knowledge of their sacred history, and the knowledge of their divine covenant. And here is what should deeply disturb your spirit. The very same book that was twisted and used as a tool to enslave your ancestors is the exact same book that lays out in painstaking detail how and why that captivity would happen. But be patient because this revelation goes even deeper. For generations, you were taught the stories of the Bible in disconnected pieces. A tale of Noah over here, a lesson on Moses over there, and a vague image of Jesus floating serenely in the clouds. The true overarching storyline was never connected for you. That central storyline is about a mighty and powerful people, their fall through disobedience, their subsequent exile and captivity, a period of profound forgetting, and a prophesied final awakening. And it is a divine pattern that an awakening must always precede a restoration. This sequence is unbreakable. Joseph did not rise to power in Egypt until after he endured the pit. Moses did not become a deliverer until after his long years in exile. The nation of Israel was not brought back to their land until after their period of captivity was complete. So what if the centuries of slavery were not the conclusion of your story? What if that brutal period was merely the middle passage of a much grander narrative? Now here is the concept that profoundly shakes people. The Bible never once declares that God forgot his people. On the contrary, it says the people would forget themselves. The book of Lamentations, chapter 5, verse 7, confesses, "Our fathers have sinned and are not, and we have borne their iniquities." That verse is a clear description of generational consequences. It is the definition of an inherited exile passed down through bloodlines. It is the blueprint for how an identity is stolen through overwhelming and sustained trauma. And you must understand that trauma is the most powerful weapon ever wielded against a person's destiny. When you successfully disconnect a people from their heritage and their past, you gain the ability to completely control their future. This is exactly why the assault on your ancestors was never just about physical brutality. Vichy They were deliberately renamed, systematically reclassified, and their very humanity was redefined by their captors. The objective wasn't just to break their bodies, the primary target was always their collective memory. Because the logic is simple, if you can be conditioned to never know who you were, you will certainly never discover who you are destined to become. But here is the critical element they failed to factor into their evil equation. Divine prophecy has no expiration date. And in this divine pattern, there is always a predestined moment when God himself intervenes to restore memory. In Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 1, it says, "And it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee." Please read that passage again with spiritual eyes. When all these things are come upon thee, referring to the curses, the captivity, the worldwide scattering. After enduring the oppression, the prophecy states, "And thou shalt call them to mind." This is a prophesied act of remembrance. Memory will return among all the nations. This is not a revival in one country or on one continent. It is a global phenomenon happening in every single nation where the people were scattered. That prophecy is being fulfilled as we speak. This is what is happening right now, and it is the very reason why this specific era feels so different, so charged with significance. You can feel it in your spirit, can you not? An undeniable stirring deep within. There is something awakening, something deeply unsettling to the old ways, something that is pulling you to challenge everything you were taught. This feeling is not rebellion, it is the holy process of remembrance. But I must give you this warning, every great awakening is met with ferocious resistance. Because the very moment you begin to seriously ask, who am I really? The established system immediately begins to panic and ask, how do we stop this awakening? This is the reason why this knowledge has been intentionally hidden, deliberately watered down, publicly mocked, and strategically labeled as a conspiracy or a form of hate. They do this because the truth does not require anyone's permission to completely shatter a world of lies. And the absolute truth is, your people were never created to be permanently relegated to the bottom of society. Psalm chapter 83 verse 4 reveals the enemy's agenda in plain sight. They have said, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance." The entire plot was to cause total and complete amnesia. Erase their remembrance and you erase their power. Erase their power and you erase their destiny. But here is the glorious twist in the divine plan. The Bible also promises that this conspiracy fails every single time it is attempted. This is because for this chosen people, remembrance is not optional. It is a prophetic imperative, and once this awakening begins, it gains an unstoppable accelerating momentum. This divine acceleration is why our respected elders, our curious young people, our brilliant scholars, our thinkers on the streets, and our most sincere spiritual seekers are all arriving at the same monumental questions at the exact same time. Many different roads can lead to the same ultimate place, but what if that destination is the rediscovery of your true identity? And now we approach the part of the story that most people are simply not prepared to confront. Deep within the scriptures, there is a singular powerful prophecy, one specific verse that functions as a key, unlocking the explanation for how this historical event occurred, the reasons why it was allowed to happen, and most critically, the very people to whom it happened. It is a verse so breathtakingly precise, so profoundly unsettling, that entire religious and academic institutions have spent generations learning how to systematically avoid it. This avoidance is not because the verse is vague or confusing, it's because its meaning is terrifyingly clear. And once your eyes are open to it, you can never go back to seeing things the old way. I urge you to stay with me on this journey, because in this next chapter, we are going to open the sacred text to the pages they always skipped over the ones they never walked you through with careful attention. We will examine the prophecy they intentionally rushed past, the very verse that forges an unbreakable link between chattel slavery, the horror of exile ships, the systematic loss of identity, and the great awakening that is now unfolding. And when you see the evidence laid out, you will finally understand that none of this was a random accident of history. It was all written beforehand. Now allow me to guide you to the verse they never dare to explain slowly. It's not because its language is complex, but because once you grasp its true implication, the entire established narrative crumbles into dust. Deuteronomy chapter 28 stands as one of the most frequently quoted and yet most selectively taught chapters in the entire Bible. You have undoubtedly heard fragments of it throughout your life. Blessings will follow if you obey, and curses will befall you if you disobey. But what you are almost certainly never shown is that this chapter isn't just spiritual poetry. It is structured like a binding legal contract, a divine covenant that came with severe, detailed warnings. And the final, ultimate curse described within it is not meant to be symbolic. It is forensically specific, like an indictment read in a celestial court. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 68 says, "And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you." Let the weight of those words settle in for a moment, because this single passage, when examined honestly, completely eliminates all historical guesswork. First, let's analyze the word Egypt. In the original Hebrew, the word used is Mitzrayim. It is crucial to understand that Mitzrayim means far more than a geographical location on a map. The word's literal meaning translates to a state of bondage, a condition of extreme oppression, and a place defined by forced, brutal labor. Egypt was an oppressive system long before it was a country. So when the scripture prophesies a return to Egypt again, it is not speaking of a physical journey back to the Nile River Valley. It is explicitly forecasting a return to a condition of enslavement. Now notice the critical qualifier, again. This single word confirms that the people being addressed in this prophecy had already been enslaved once before a detail that immediately and dramatically narrows the focus of who this could be about. But let's continue, because the next detail is even more specific with ships. We must pause and absorb the significance of this. This is the very point where prophecy collides with indisputable history. The ancient Israelites famously escaped from their bondage in Egypt by traveling on foot through the desert. There is not a single record, neither biblical nor secular, of the ancient Israelites ever being captured and taken back into slavery by ships in ancient times. It never occurred. Therefore, this prophecy cannot be talking about events in antiquity. This is by its very nature a future-oriented prophecy pointing to an event far down the timeline. Now let's be incredibly precise with the historical facts. The transatlantic slave trade is the one and only mass enslavement event in all of human history that was conducted primarily by seafaring vessels over a period of centuries involving millions of people from multiple nations. Between the 15th and 19th centuries, historical estimates confirm that over 12.5 million Africans were violently transported across the vast Atlantic Ocean by ship. No other event in the annals of history remotely matches this immense scale. No other event duplicates this specific method of transportation, and no other event resulted in such a widespread and permanent global dispersion. Now read the following line from the verse with extreme care. "By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again." The meaning here is a profound and total severance from your homeland. This wasn't just about being physically unable to return. It was about being cut off culturally, politically, and losing your very identity. Then the prophecy delivers its most devastating and heartbreaking line. "And there you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen." This describes men, women, and families being fractured and commodified, their identities erased and reset on auction blocks. And then comes the final clause that seals the entire prophecy, "and no man shall buy you." This phrase does not mean that no one would purchase you as a slave. Clearly millions were sold. The original Hebrew phrase here carries the meaning that no one would redeem you. This meant that no friendly nation would intervene. No liberating army would ever come for you. No political savior would arise to rescue you. You would be utterly trapped and abandoned within that brutal system. Now you must ask yourself a serious question. What specific group of people was enslaved, transported across entire oceans on ships, and then sold as property as men and women, while being systematically stripped of their language, their names, and their national heritage, all with no one to rescue them, no path of return, and no major global intervention on their behalf? There is only one answer in all of human history that fits every single specific detail of this prophecy, and that is the very reason this verse was never made a central point of teaching. Because the moment you correctly identify the people described in the prophecy, everything else about history and identity begins to fall into place. Leviticus chapter 26 reinforces this very same pattern. Verse 33 of that chapter says, "And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate." Notice the recurring themes: being scattered among all the nations of the world, a complete loss of your land, the destruction of your sovereignty, and ultimately the erasure of your collective memory. The Book of Lamentations chapter 5 verse 2 adds to this, stating, "Our inheritance is turned to strangers, our houses to aliens." This is not just a beautiful metaphor. It is a literal description of the economics of exile and dispossession. Now we arrive at the question that causes so much discomfort. Why wasn't this powerful historical interpretation ever taught from the pulpits? Why were generations of Black Christians encouraged to read their Bibles for devotional comfort, but strongly discouraged from ever analyzing it historically? The answer is because a clear historical context creates a powerful sense of identity, and a people who truly understand their identity possess an inner power that cannot be easily controlled or manipulated. This is not some new revelation. In fact, many influential theologians during the 18th and 19th centuries openly discussed and debated this very connection, seeing the undeniable parallels long ago. This hidden truth wasn't located in public sermons, nor was it found in academic papers, private letters, or the strategic plans of missionaries. The archives of the British colonial era reveal a very deliberate and methodical effort to introduce a version of Christianity to enslaved African people. But it was a version that strategically omitted the Old Testament's framework of identity, concentrating instead on the virtues of obedience in this life and the promise of heaven after death. This is documented in the Church Missionary Society archives dating to the 1820s. You must understand, this was not some kind of theological accident. This was a controlled and calculated curriculum. The reason is simple: if the people held in bondage ever came to realize that their own story was written into the sacred text, they would have never submitted to a narrative of permanent inferiority. Now we arrive at the part that nearly everyone seems to miss. The chapter of Deuteronomy 28 does not conclude with a final unbreakable set of curses. It actually concludes with consequences, which inherently means that those consequences are capable of being reversed. Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 3 makes this promise that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. The divine sequence is clear. A great gathering is prophesied to happen after the great scattering. A profound act of remembering is destined to follow the long period of exile. A spiritual awakening must come before the ultimate restoration, which means that what you are personally witnessing in the world right now is not just random social outrage or some passing trend. It is in fact a prophetic phase, and these phases move in a very specific order. And here is the detail that should truly make you stop and think. The Bible never once states that the nations of the world will voluntarily release this group of people. It says that God himself will intervene when the appointed time is full. So, as you witness global systems begin to shake, as you see currencies becoming unstable, as you watch the official narratives begin to collapse, and as truth starts to pour through the digital cracks of our society, know that this is not chaos. This is a transition. But we are now entering the most dangerous part of any spiritual awakening, and that part is the arrival of evidence. Because the moment ancient prophecy begins to align with observable real-world events, the entire structure of disbelief begins to collapse. And as we proceed, I will guide you through the events that are taking place right now, politically, culturally, spiritually, and economically, that are mirroring these biblical prophecies with an accuracy that is truly disturbing. This is not based on opinion, but on observable patterns, hard data, and undeniable timing. Stay with me on this journey, because once you begin to see the signs, you will finally understand why this moment in history feels so incredibly intense. Stay with me, because we are now transitioning from ancient scripture to modern-day evidence. There is a fundamental reason why this awakening has a global feel. There is a specific reason why it feels so urgent. And there is a profound reason why it is all happening now. Not 50 years in the past, not 100 years ago, but during your lifetime. Jesus himself provided a rule for how to recognize prophetic timing. In Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 and 33, it says, "Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise, ye when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near even at the doors." He did not say to guess or speculate. He commanded us to watch the signs. So let's do precisely that, because once you line up all the signs, it becomes utterly impossible to deny the emerging pattern. The first sign is the simultaneous questioning of identity happening all across the diaspora. This is not a localized event, it is not just a cultural trend, and it is not mere social media hype. This is happening from Nigeria to Jamaica, from London to Atlanta, from the heart of Brazil to the shores of Haiti. We are talking about people who have no connection to one another, raised in completely different countries, attending different churches and denominations, yet they are all asking the same foundational questions at the exact same time. Who were we before the era of slavery began? Why does the version of the Bible we were taught feel so incomplete? Why does the record of African history seem to abruptly end right before the year 1500? A convergence like this does not happen organically. This is the sign of a collective memory being reactivated. While modern sociologists might give it a clinical name like post-traumatic identity recovery, the Bible calls it by a simpler, more powerful name, remembrance. The second sign is the DNA awakening and the widespread reclamation of ancestry. Between the years 2016 and 2024, the use of DNA testing among populations of African descent surged by an astonishing 400%. That statistic comes from the MIT Technology Review in a 2023 report. But here is where it gets truly compelling. People were not just looking for percentages of their heritage, they were intensely searching for names for specific regions for their tribes and for their ultimate origins. This deep desire is not an act of vanity, it is an act of prophecy being fulfilled. The prophet Jeremiah in chapter 23 verse 3 says, "And I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries whither I have driven them." You cannot gather a people that you cannot first identify. So logically, the re-establishment of identity had to come first. This leads to the third powerful sign, the collapse of unquestioned religious authority. I want you to notice something very specific. People are not walking away from God. They are walking away from a filtered and controlled theology. Attendance in traditional Western church denominations has plummeted, a trend most pronounced among Black millennials and Gen Xers. This data is confirmed by the Pew Research Center's 2022 study. But at the same time, direct spiritual engagement has been rising. Bible reading outside of any institutional framework has seen a massive increase. There's a renewed interest in Hebrew studies, in historical context, and in ancient Near Eastern scholarship. People are no longer content to simply ask, "What does my pastor say?" Instead, they are asking a much more powerful question: what does the text actually say for itself? And that question is incredibly dangerous to all systems that have been built on controlling the flow of information. Because as the prophet Hosea said in chapter 6 verse 3, "Then shall we know if we follow on to know the Lord." True intimacy cannot exist without first building a foundation of knowledge. This leads us to the fourth crucial sign, a worldwide shaking of both political and economic structures. History has shown us time and again that great empires never just fade away quietly. We are seeing a convergence of devastating debt crises, currencies becoming dangerously unstable, global supply chains fracturing, and the constant drumbeat of wars and rumors of more wars. The book of Luke chapter 21 verse 25 issues a stark warning about this very time. It reads, "And upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring." The word perplexity here is critical. It signifies a state of deep, anxious confusion for which there appears to be no solution. Does that description resonate with the world you see around you? This points to an essential prophetic principle that must be understood. Whenever the Almighty Creator prepares to restore a people to their rightful heritage, He first begins to destabilize the oppressive systems that hold them captive. This action is not driven by revenge, but by a divine reality. Those corrupt systems are fundamentally incompatible with the light of truth and cannot coexist with it. The fifth sign is a modern phenomenon that serves as a prophetic accelerator: the internet. This one development has fundamentally changed every aspect of the awakening. For the first time in all of human history, the established gatekeepers have completely lost their monopoly over the flow of information. Ancient manuscripts that were once jealously guarded and locked away in European libraries have now been digitized for all to see. African artifacts long hidden from view in private collections are now being exposed to the world. Historical shipping manifests are now public records, and complex biblical lexicons, once reserved for elite theologians, are now accessible with a simple search. Daniel chapter 12 verse 4 prophesied this saying, "Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." This verse was never about airplanes or high-speed trains. It was a prophecy about the velocity of information. And as that scripture foretold, once knowledge increases at this rate, the awakening process accelerates exponentially. Now permit me to show you something that runs even deeper. Examine the specific timing of events. Consider the civil rights movement in the 1960s. That was followed almost immediately by a wave of independence movements across the continent of Africa. But what came next? A strategic and brutal pushback. Mass incarceration was implemented on an industrial scale alongside deliberate economic suppression. The reason is a timeless truth: every genuine awakening is always met with fierce and calculated resistance. Remember that Pharaoh intensified the slavery of the Israelites immediately after Moses appeared on the scene. Exodus chapter 1 verse 12 illustrates this perfectly, stating, "But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew." Oppression is so often a reaction to a rising power, not its underlying cause. Now apply that lesson and look closely at the years from 2020 to 2026. We saw global protests on a scale never before witnessed, statues of historical oppressors being toppled, official history being challenged at its core, long-accepted narratives being rewritten, and corrupt power structures being laid bare for all to see. This was not random chaos. This was the intense pain of a global transition. But the following point is the one that should truly command your absolute attention. These great awakenings do not only occur on a spiritual plane, they manifest physically through demographic shifts. According to projections, by the year 2050, people of African descent will represent nearly 40% of the entire world's population. This information comes directly from the United Nations Population Division's report from 2023. This is not a coincidence. This is prophetic mathematics at work. Genesis chapter 22 verse 17 echoes this promise, declaring, "In multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven." You must understand the divine order population growth precedes the growth of influence. And the growth of influence is the necessary prerequisite for total restoration. Now you can finally comprehend why this particular moment feels so pressured, why everything feels so rushed, and why every advance is so fiercely contested. It is because all divine awakenings have a specific window of opportunity, and not every group benefits when a people's collective memory begins to return. But here is the undeniable truth: no one can escape this shift. Once a people begin to see the historical patterns, they can never be made to unsee them. Once a divine prophecy begins to manifest in the physical realm, its forward momentum cannot be reversed. And that is precisely why the forces of suppression always become most intense and desperate right before the moment of breakthrough. This reality leads us directly to the next phase of our discussion. Because if this awakening is as real as all the signs indicate, then one question becomes utterly unavoidable. Why was this essential truth buried and hidden for such a long time? Who stood to gain from your collective amnesia? And how was the Holy Bible itself twisted and weaponized to keep you spiritually asleep? In the next chapter, we're going to walk step by step through the timeline of this suppression, from the great civilizations of ancient Africa, through the era of colonial churches, all the way to our modern education systems. And once you clearly see how incredibly coordinated this effort was over centuries, you will finally understand why this prophecy had to wait for this specific generation to be fulfilled. If this awakening is real, and by now you can surely feel in your spirit that it is, then one question becomes more pressing than all the others. Why did we not learn any of this before now? Why was this information never taught in our churches, our schools, or our history textbooks? Why did it take multiple centuries for these powerful connections to finally be brought back into the light? The answer is deeply uncomfortable, which is why so many refuse to face it. This historical blackout wasn't an accident. It was meticulously engineered. Let's rewind the historical timeline. Long before the era of colonialism began, Africa was not some empty dark continent waiting to be discovered. It was a thriving land home to highly advanced kingdoms, vast trade networks, world-renowned universities, and powerful spiritual centers. The civilization of Kemet, which is now commonly called Ancient Egypt, was the intellectual epicenter of the ancient world. The Kingdom of Ethiopia was a recognized and respected biblical power. Carthage rose to challenge the might of the Roman Empire. The Empire of Mali controlled the global gold supply. The Songhai Empire produced legions of scholars whose brilliant writings survive to this day. And here is the crucial fact that is rarely spoken aloud. Africa was not an outsider to the biblical world. It was deeply and intricately woven into the very fabric of the biblical narrative. Psalm chapter 68 verse 31 clearly states, "Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." That verse is not describing a forgotten or marginalized people. It is a clear description of immense influence, a profound spiritual connection, and global significance. But then came a catastrophic disruption. It was not just a military invasion, but a complete reframing of history and identity. Colonialism's greatest conquest was not over land. Its ultimate victory was conquering the narrative. The European colonial powers understood a core principle of control. If you seek permanent dominion over a people, you don't merely rule their bodies. You must first erase and then rewrite their identity. It all began with a calculated campaign of erasure, where the vast and verifiable history of Africa was deliberately recategorized as mere myth, and the continent's deep spiritual traditions were dismissed and insultingly labeled as pagan. Consequently, the undeniable and pivotal presence of African people throughout the biblical narrative was systematically minimized, ignored, or completely scrubbed from the record. Then a weaponized version of the church was introduced. It is imperative that you listen with great care. Let me be unequivocally clear. This is not an assault on genuine faith or the people who hold it dear. This is a critical exposure of how that very faith was twisted and misused as an instrument of control. During the horrific period of the transatlantic slave trade, the message of Christianity was intentionally and strategically filtered, altered before it was ever delivered to the enslaved African people. Astonishingly specific slave Bibles were actually created and distributed. These were not the complete scriptures. Over 90% of the Old Testament was surgically excised, with a particular focus on removing books that spoke of liberation, divine identity, and a God who brings judgment upon oppressors. This information can be verified and is sourced from the Museum of the Bible, specifically its Slave Bible exhibit, which was displayed in the year 2018. The story of Exodus was considered too inspiring and was therefore minimized. The laws in Deuteronomy were deemed dangerous to the established order. The words of the prophets were seen as far too empowering to be left in the text. In the place of these truths, the entire spiritual focus was relentlessly narrowed down to a single perverted theme: absolute and unconditional obedience to earthly masters. Verses like, "Servants obey your masters," were preached relentlessly, but they were always violently torn from their original scriptural context. There was never any teaching on the sacred covenant relationship, nor any mention of the dire consequences awaiting those who oppress God's people. This was never about genuine theology. It was a sophisticated and brutal form of psychological warfare designed to break the spirit. The oppressors understood that if the enslaved people ever had the chance to read the complete Bible and recognize it as the historical record of their own ancestors. Now let's layer the education system on top of this religious manipulation. For generations, modern schooling systems deliberately taught people of African descent that their entire history began with the shackles of slavery. They created a narrative that there was nothing of value before that time. No great kings, no advanced scholars, no holy covenant with the Almighty. Nothing but a historical void followed by captivity. An indoctrination of this magnitude inflicts a profound and lasting trauma on the collective mind. Modern psychologists identify this phenomenon as historical amnesia. The Bible, however, calls it by a more direct name: forgetting who you are. The prophet Jeremiah, in chapter 17, verse 4, issues a stark warning about this very condition. The scripture reads, "And thou even thyself shalt discontinue from thine heritage." It is crucial to understand that this is not a gentle suggestion. It is a grave and prophetic warning of a curse. When you successfully disconnect a people from their heritage, you are stealing far more than just their pride. You are robbing them of their divine compass and their sense of direction. You effectively create a population that knows how to survive, but has forgotten how to lead a people who consume what others produce but no longer build for themselves, who react emotionally but do not organize strategically. And this brings us to the most difficult reality to confront. Some of our own black institutions, often unknowingly, became participants in maintaining this very suppression. Well-meaning churches preached a message of salvation that was tragically severed from our true biblical identity. Our centers of education taught a model of progress that was completely detached from our origins. Our media platforms showcased a version of success that had no historical memory. This was not done out of malice, but as a result of a tragic inheritance of the very systems designed to control us. Generational trauma is passed down just as surely as any physical trait. But the fulfillment of divine prophecy does not halt simply because people are wounded and hurting. Instead, prophecy waits patiently for the appointed time until the conditions in the world are perfectly aligned. It waits until the widespread access to information finally shatters the long-held monopolies on truth. It waits until the paralyzing grip of fear begins to weaken and until a new generation rises to the forefront. A generation that is no longer satisfied with being fed historical fragments and half-truths. We are that generation. We are living in that prophesied time. And right now we are witnessing the classic mistake that every arrogant empire makes throughout history. They incorrectly assume that their systems of suppression can last forever. But the Holy Bible proclaims the very opposite. The book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 15, declares a powerful principle: God requireth that which is past. The profound meaning here is that whatever has been hidden and buried must eventually be called forth and return to the light. And when a suppressed truth finally resurfaces, it comes back with an even greater force because it has now been tested and proven true in the fires of concealment. What did these controlling systems fail to anticipate? They gambled that the internet would serve as the ultimate distraction for you. Instead, it became your most powerful tool for connection and validation. They assumed that endless entertainment would numb your senses into apathy. Instead, it provoked deep and awakening questions within your spirit. They boldly declared that history was a settled matter. Instead, historical archives were digitized and opened for the entire world to investigate. And so now people everywhere are meticulously comparing the words of Scripture with the records of secular history. They are tracing linguistic ties with ancient migration patterns, and they are lining up biblical prophecies with the cold, hard data found in slave ship manifests. They are holding the verses of the Bible up against their own lived experiences. And the resulting pattern is so clear that it has become undeniable. This is the very reason why resistance to the old false narrative is dramatically increasing. It is why the official narratives are being controlled more tightly, why slanderous labels are being thrown about so carelessly, and why this powerful global awakening is being met with such intense and desperate mockery. Because the enemy's goal has always been and continues to be the same: keep you disconnected from your true identity, just long enough for you to completely miss the divine window for your restoration. But here is the truth that should bring a profound calm to your soul. You cannot stop a prophecy from coming to pass. Man can certainly attempt to delay it. They can distort it and they can create countless distractions from it. But when the Creator's appointed time arrives, the dam of deception will break and collective memory will come rushing through with unstoppable force. And the very moment that this true memory returns to the people, the prophesied gathering begins. This brings us to the next phase of our journey, because what you are experiencing is not the first time this sequence has unfolded. The Bible itself records this exact repeating pattern over and over again. It begins with severe oppression, which inevitably leads to a period of forgetting one's identity. That amnesia is then shattered by a divine awakening, which in turn leads to a great gathering of the scattered people. And this all culminates in the final glorious stage, complete and total restoration. In the next chapter, we are going to meticulously trace this incredible awakening pattern through both scripture and recorded history, demonstrating exactly why this current moment is following that same divine sequence. Once you clearly see this pattern, you will understand that you are not late to the story. You are precisely on time. There is a deep spiritual reason why this all feels so familiar, a powerful reason why you are experiencing what feels like a historical déjà vu. It is because the very events you are living through in this moment have happened before on multiple occasions throughout history, and the Bible documents each instance with absolute precision. This is because our God is not a God of random acts. He moves in deliberate, consistent, and recognizable patterns. And once you learn to recognize that divine pattern, fear will begin to lose its powerful grip on your heart. To understand this, let us begin with the account of Joseph. It is vital to recognize that Joseph's ascension to power was not an overnight event. It began with the ultimate act of treachery, a profound betrayal delivered by his own flesh and blood, his very own people. In the wake of this deceit, he was bartered and sold as if he were mere property, treated as nothing more than an object for trade. His journey then led him into forced exile, dragged into an unfamiliar and alien nation, a land completely foreign to his spirit. Once there, they systematically began to dismantle his very being, stripping away his true identity and forcibly redefining who he was meant to be. After enduring all of this, he was wrongfully cast into the darkness of a prison, locked away from the world. Tell me, does this harrowing story resonate with something you already know? Does it sound eerily familiar? If we delve into the book of Genesis chapter 41, we uncover a profoundly critical truth. Joseph's incredible ascent to leadership wasn't triggered by a strategic political maneuver or a grant of power. It was ignited in the moment he remembered and reconnected with his true God-given identity. The catalyst was when Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler on earth, posed the question, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? At that inquiry, Joseph's authentic self, long buried beneath injustice and suffering, powerfully emerged. And notice the magnificent result. As Joseph rose to his appointed position, the preservation of his entire family and lineage was secured. This serves as a powerful testament that a single individual's awakening is often the very spark that leads to the collective survival and thriving of a nation. Now let's turn our attention to the figure of Moses. Here was a man who was raised within the gilded palaces of Egypt, immersed in its culture and knowledge, yet he was fundamentally not an Egyptian. He lived his early life in a precarious space between two profoundly different worlds and identities. The book of Hebrews in chapter 11 verses 24 to 25 shines a light on this, declaring, "By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter." This act of refusal is of monumental importance. It establishes a divine principle before there can be any true deliverance for a people. There must first be an individual's conscious rejection of a false identity, a complete turning away from the lie. Moses was required to remember who he truly was before he could possess the authority to liberate anyone else. And precisely at the moment of his awakening, the established power structure, embodied by Pharaoh, began to resist with tremendous force. The reaction was predictable, more demanding, labor-intensified oppression and stricter controls. But this intense opposition was not an indication that Moses was wrong or misguided. In fact, it was the clearest possible sign that the entire system felt its foundation being threatened. Now watch carefully as this divine pattern repeats itself. The nation of Israel once again finds itself in captivity. As time stretches on and generations pass, the collective memory of who they are begins to fade. Tragically, the harsh reality of their oppression starts to feel normal, like the natural state of things. Then at the appointed time, God sends a powerful reminder. It could be a prophet, a miraculous sign, or a single catalytic event. As Exodus chapter 3 verse 7 proclaims, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. So I have come down to deliver them." It is essential that you recognize the specific order of events. First, the affliction is acknowledged from on high. Next, the people's memory and identity are restored. Only then is the process of physical deliverance initiated. Now let us leap forward in the biblical timeline, moving into the accounts of the New Testament. We encounter the Ethiopian eunuch in the 8th chapter of Acts, and it's clear he wasn't an ignorant man. He was highly educated, politically powerful, and deeply religious, yet he was missing the most vital element of all the proper context for his knowledge. Acts chapter 8 verse 30 records the pivotal question from Philip, a question that rings with significance even today. Do you understand what you are reading? That query still echoes with immense power in our time. The eunuch possessed the sacred scriptures, the written text itself, but he lacked the essential framework to unlock its deepest meaning and personal relevance. The very instant that Philip provided the connection, a profound awakening took place, and the eunuch's immediate response was to journey back to Africa. This teaches us a crucial lesson. People who are truly awakened do not remain silent or stationary. They are compelled to carry that divine revelation back home. Let's step outside of the biblical text for just a moment and observe the currents of world history, because you will find that it follows the exact same rhythm. The great independence movements across Africa did not begin with guns and ammunition. They were born from the rediscovery of authentic identity and the intentional revival of ancestral languages. It was a rebirth of cultural pride and an exhaustive exploration of their own history that built the foundation. From that solid ground came resistance, which in turn created massive disruption, and that disruption ultimately led to national independence. The civil rights movement right here in the United States followed this very same blueprint with incredible precision. It started with a widespread awareness of injustice, which then cultivated an unbreakable bond of unity. That unity empowered the people for a direct confrontation with the powers of oppression, which eventually forced systemic change. And in every case, the established systems responded with their usual tactics: fear-heightened surveillance, malicious smear campaigns, violence, and endless distractions. The reason for this backlash is simple. Genuine awakenings are a fundamental threat to the permanence of any corrupt or unjust power structure. Now consider our own modern era. For many decades, access to information was meticulously controlled and curated by a very small group of gatekeepers. But then the internet arrived and changed everything. Suddenly, ancient manuscripts that had been hidden away in dusty archives became available to everyone. The original biblical languages became accessible to anyone with a desire to learn. The long-suppressed annals of African history became traceable online. For the first time on a global scale, established lies could be held up and compared directly against a mountain of verifiable facts. This information explosion was not some random technological accident. It was a fulfillment of prophecy. Daniel chapter 12 verse 10 says, "Many shall be purified and made white and tried. But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." This scripture tells us that true understanding is a selective gift. Not everyone awakens to the truth at the same time. This is vitally important to grasp, because these spiritual awakenings always happen in successive waves. First come the dedicated seekers of truth. They are followed by those who are merely curious. After them come those who are resistant to the new information, and finally there are those who are openly hostile toward it. If you are watching and understanding this message, you are certainly not in that last group. You are on the leading edge of this movement. And here is the key principle: to grasp the awakening itself is never the ultimate goal. It is merely the signal. It is the divine alarm sounding to let you know that the time for a great gathering is next. The book of Zephaniah chapter 3 verses 8 and 9 speaks of this. It describes a prophetic moment when God will restore a pure language and bring about unity and shared purpose after a period of judgment and confusion. This is precisely why you are now seeing these cross-continental conversations springing up. It explains the growing attempts at diaspora unity and the burgeoning discussions surrounding Pan-African economics and self-sufficiency. It is a spiritual realignment on a massive scale. It is not perfect and it is far from polished, but it is undeniably taking form. We must always remember that every great divine restoration begins in what looks like a mess. But now we arrive at the most vital part of this recurring pattern. Following every great awakening, there is an immediate call to take on great responsibility. Joseph was not awakened just so he could feel special. Moses was not awakened simply to have his identity validated. The Ethiopian eunuch was not awakened merely to become better informed than others. They all took immediate and decisive action. This truth brings us face to face with the most dangerous and consequential question you may ever have to answer. If this global awakening is indeed real, if biblical prophecy is truly aligning before our very eyes, if a lost identity is being restored to millions, then who are you personally supposed to be, and what are you supposed to do in this historic moment? Ponder that question seriously, because an awakening that doesn't translate into meaningful action will inevitably decay into frustration and despair. And the Bible makes it clear that God never restores an identity without also assigning a divine purpose. In our next conversation, we are going to speak plainly and directly about who you truly are according to the scriptures. We will explore what the Bible actually says about your lineage and what these incredible truths mean for how you are meant to move forward spiritually, economically, culturally, and as a collective people. This is the critical juncture where the mindset of survival gives way to the reality of divine empowerment. Let us declare this truth clearly, without apology, without fear, and without watering it down to make other people feel comfortable. You are not the descendants of slaves. Slavery was a horrific condition that was forced upon your ancestors. It was something that happened to them. It was never and will never be the sum total of who they were. The Holy Scriptures never define a people by the circumstances of their captivity. Instead, they are consistently defined by their divine calling and ultimate purpose. And the very moment you grasp that fundamental truth, your entire worldview is transformed. The book of Psalms in chapter 68 verse 31 powerfully declares, "Princes shall come out of Egypt." It continues, "Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." This sacred passage is not a prediction of a continent seeking charity. It is a prophecy of a people's powerful emergence onto the world stage. Make no mistake, the word princes is not some symbolic language used to describe victims. It definitively means leaders, sovereigns, rulers, and those vested with genuine authority. And in the geography of the Bible, Ethiopia, which is translated from Cush in the original Hebrew manuscripts, is the term used to represent the peoples of the African continent. The profound implication is that Africa is not waiting in the wings of history for someone else's permission to be significant. It is prophetically destined to rise wielding immense spiritual authority. Now, with that understanding as our foundation, let us begin the necessary work of completely dismantling the foundational lie you were raised to believe. You were systematically taught that your ancestors were a people without notable names, devoid of a rich culture, and absent from the pages of history, a blank slate who were supposedly given religion, language, and a reason to exist by outsiders. That poisonous lie was designed to serve a specific function because a people who are convinced they have no origin will accept any destination. But the Word of God speaks a profoundly different story. The prophet Isaiah in chapter 18 speaks with stunning clarity to a people who have been scattered and peeled, a people both feared and respected, a nation taken into captivity, but a people who are intimately known by their Creator. Then the prophet Zephaniah in chapter 3 verse 10 proclaims, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshippers, my scattered people will bring me offerings." I urge you to read that verse with careful attention, my dispersed. God never refers to his scattered people as abandoned or forgotten people. He explicitly calls them his own. This reveals that the dispersion was never an act of divine rejection. It was a strategic and divine positioning for a future purpose. Here is the powerful truth that most will never tell you. The era of slavery did not have the power to erase your lineage. It only managed to interrupt it. And we must always remember that interruptions are by their very nature temporary. Lineage, on the other hand, is permanent. This eternal connection is the very reason why enslaved Africans never truly lost their spirituality. Instead, they masterfully adapted it. This is why the rhythm in their souls survived the weight of iron chains. It's why their intimate prayers survived the prohibitions of their captors. It is why their resilient hope survived generations of unspeakable brutality. It's because you were carrying something inside of you that was far older and more powerful than your captivity. You were carrying the deep, resonant memory of a divine covenant, a sacred promise, even when you did not possess the specific language to articulate it. And now in this generation, that language is powerfully returning. This is precisely what makes this current moment so potent and to some so dangerous. Because a restoration of true identity doesn't just change how you feel about yourself. It fundamentally alters how you move through the world. If you perceive yourself primarily as a victim, your strategy will be to beg existing systems to treat you with more kindness. But if you see yourself as an heir to a divine promise, you will begin to build your own alternatives. That is why this message is not intended to be mere emotional hype. It is designed to be an activation blueprint for a new era. Spiritually, this means you stop outsourcing your relationship with the Most High. You begin to study diligently, you learn to contextualize the scriptures for your own life. and you reclaim prayer as an intimate dialogue, not a public performance. Educationally, you must shift from merely memorizing fragmented and sanitized versions of your story, and instead begin the vital work of reconstructing your own complete narratives. This reconstruction must cover your true history, your ancestral languages, your principles of economics, and your authentic theology. Economically, you must stop chasing proximity to external power structures and instead begin to create and circulate value within your own community. A mindset of ownership must completely replace the posture of dependency. Culturally, you are called to stop mimicking a culture born of mere survival and instead revive a culture that is rooted in profound dignity. This includes reclaiming your names, restoring your traditions, and embracing your responsibilities. Politically, you must cease being perpetually reactive and instead become profoundly strategic, moving beyond short-term emotional cycles to embrace a long-term multi-generational vision. In terms of community, you must begin to gather with clear intention, not just for social reasons, but with a shared and divine purpose. This is critical because divine prophecy rarely moves through isolated individuals alone. Its power is unleashed through unified people groups. And here is the sentence that changes the entire paradigm. Every single intentional step you take towards spiritual and cultural alignment is a prophetic act. This is not because you are inherently more special than anyone else, but because you have been divinely positioned for this time. This is the very reason this awakening process often feels so heavy and overwhelming. It's because deep down in your spirit, you recognize that the season of comfort and ignorance is rapidly coming to an end. You cannot unknow what you now see. And once your true identity is restored, divine accountability inevitably follows. Luke chapter 12 verse 48 clearly states, "For unto whomsoever much is given of him shall be much required." The acquisition of this knowledge brings with it an immense responsibility. But here is the profound encouragement for you today. You are not late to the scene. You are perfectly preserved for this very moment. Your ancestors miraculously survived the suffocating hulls of ships, the bondage of chains, the injustice of man-made laws, the cruelty of whips, the campaigns of cultural erasure, and the weight of enforced silence, all so that you could stand at a moment in history where truth is readily accessible. That was not a random sequence of events. That was a sacred relay race. They were tasked with carrying the baton of pain. You have been tasked with carrying the baton of purpose. And now we arrive at the pivotal turning point of this entire message. It is this knowledge by itself does not possess the power to shift historical timelines. But unity does. Corporate agreement does. Bold declaration does. This is why the next chapter of our journey is not just about more explanation. It is about active engagement, fervent prayer, unwavering commitment, and full-scale activation. This is the critical juncture where the watchers in the crowd become participants on the field. This is the moment where a personal awakening evolves into a corporate alignment. And that alignment has the power to change absolutely everything. If you have listened to this message all the way through, please understand that you are not here by some random accident. A social media algorithm does not sufficiently explain your presence. Simple curiosity is not a deep enough reason. The search for entertainment completely fails to account for why you are still engaged. Divine alignment does. There is a specific and sovereign reason this message found you right here and right now. It is because genuine awakenings are never passive. They always demand a response from those who hear the call. Not at some later date, not on some vague someday, not when the circumstances finally feel convenient for you. The time is now. Joshua chapter 24 verse 15 declares, "Choose you this day whom you will serve." Notice the specific language. It doesn't say understand, it doesn't say consider. It says choose. This is a time for deep study, not for endless debate. It is a moment for a definitive choice, because once the veil of truth is lifted, the comfort of neutrality vanishes forever. So, before we proceed any further, I am asking you to participate in a simple yet profoundly powerful act. If you are watching this and the message is resonating deep within your spirit, if you are connecting the dots and seeing the undeniable pattern, I want you to declare it in the comments. Type 1, see the pattern. This isn't for my validation, it's for your own affirmation, because a public declaration is what gives an internal awakening its external power. Now, for those of you who are feeling something even more profound stirring, if you can sense a part of you that has been intentionally numbed, is now rousing itself as you listen to this, then I urge you to type "I am awake." Never underestimate the power of your words. The very sound you create carries the weight of your intention, and your agreement is the spark that ignites a collective movement. The Holy Scriptures pose a critical question in Amos chapter 3 verse 3. Can two walk together except they be agreed? This reveals a fundamental principle. Agreement is what forges a common direction. And at this very moment, a powerful current of agreement is beginning to surge throughout the entire diaspora. Now let's shift our focus to prayer. Not the kind of prayer that is mere performance art or empty religious theater, but prayer as true spiritual alignment. This is not a petition born from a spirit of begging. This is a declaration rooted in powerful remembrance. Wherever you may be, take a moment and join your spirit with mine in this sacred pause. Father of our ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you are the God who sees his scattered children across the globe and still calls them by name, still calls them his own. We offer our profound gratitude for your divine preservation, for a survival that was no mere accident of history, but a testament to your enduring promise. We thank you for a memory so deeply embedded in our spirit that no force on earth could ever extinguish it. We come before you, acknowledging the deep-seated pain that has been carried down through countless generations. The generational trauma, the pervasive confusion, and the long, deafening silence imposed upon us. But on this day, right now, we consciously and collectively reject the inherited falsehoods that have sought to bind us. We earnestly ask for absolute clarity in the places where our history has been systematically distorted. We cry out for divine healing where our very identity has been fractured and broken into pieces. We seek profound wisdom for the moments when raw emotion threatens to outrun our understanding. We ask you to unify us across every nation, every language, and every conceivable background. Strip away the ego, banish the fear, and dissolve the spirit of division that has kept us separated for far too long. Teach us how to become master builders, not just people who are awake to the problems. Show us how to effectively gather our people, not just engage in endless arguments. Guide us in the sacred work of restoration, not just the act of exposing what is wrong. In accordance with your promise in Joel chapter 2 verse 28, we ask you to pour out your spirit upon all flesh, upon our sons and our daughters, upon our elders and our youth, so that we may all see with divine vision, speak with holy purpose, and move with unwavering intention. And just as Psalm 68 verse 31 powerfully declares, let the descendants of Africa rise, but let this not be a rising born of chaos, but one of divine order. Let it not be a movement fueled by vengeance, but one grounded in rightful authority. And let it not be an ascent based on imitation, but one rooted firmly in our own true and restored identity. Amen. Now listen with your full attention. Prayer is never the conclusion. It is the divine handoff the moment we receive our marching orders. Because once a people achieve spiritual agreement, physical movement becomes the natural and inevitable consequence. And this leads us to a truth that many are still not prepared to confront. The next phase of this journey will not be comfortable. People who have been truly awakened develop a holy impatience with deception. They lose all tolerance for the fragmentation that once kept them weak. They find they no longer have an appetite for the trivial distractions of the world. But in exchange, they gain something far more valuable. They gain vision, and they gain unwavering discipline. They gain a long and powerful memory. This is precisely why this chapter of our history flows so seamlessly into the final one. Because prophetic awakenings are for a season, these windows of opportunity shift, and these sacred moments pass. The Bible is unequivocally clear: when an opportunity from God presents itself, you are commanded to walk through that door. Let's bring all these threads together now. Centuries of oppression were never meant to be the final chapter. That was the intense pressure required to form a diamond. The period of forgetting our history was never meant to be permanent. It was merely a strategic pause in the grand narrative. This great awakening is not the final destination. It is the divine signal flare illuminating the path forward. The work of total restoration is the sacred assignment placed upon this generation. This is the divine pattern, and you are living right in the middle of this prophetic timeline. The prophet Isaiah in chapter 60 verse 1 issues a direct command: arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. Please understand that is not just beautiful poetry to be admired. That is a set of divine instructions. You are commanded to arise mentally, shaking off the slumber of generations. You are to shine culturally, letting the brilliance of your restored identity illuminate the world. You must move collectively because here is the pressing urgency that most people tragically miss. Prophetic windows are not held open indefinitely. Divine opportunities demand a decisive response from us. These critical moments require a new level of maturity. Your ancestors prayed relentlessly simply for survival. You, however, are called to build an entire future. They endured unimaginable hardship. You are called to organize and create new systems. They preserved the embers of faith through the darkest of nights. You are being tasked to restore the entire structure. And let's be perfectly clear, this is not a call for domination over others. It is a call to profound responsibility. It means finally becoming the very thing that history conspired to prevent: a people who are stable-wise, unified, and thoroughly prepared. I want you to say this to yourself, even if it's just a whisper, and let it sink into your spirit. I am not lost. I am not late. I'm not an accident of history. I'm remembered by God. I am strategically positioned. I am deeply responsible. You possess a royal identity, not because of any sense of arrogance, but because of the divine assignment placed upon your life. You are a prophetic people, not because of some vague mysticism, but because of the specific timing into which you were born. You are a powerful people, not because of brute force, but because of your alignment with God's will. You are chosen not to be elevated above others, but chosen specifically for this monumental work. And here is the ultimate truth you must grasp. The chains that bound our ancestors were not merely made of physical iron. And true freedom is not merely a legal document or a declaration. Genuine freedom is knowing precisely who you are and then utterly refusing to live one single moment beneath that magnificent truth. The prophecy is not some distant event we are waiting for. It is actively manifesting in our reality right now. And whether this generation is the one to fully realize, it depends entirely on the choices we make and the actions we take next. Walk confidently in your God-given purpose. Build with divine wisdom. Gather your people with genuine humility. Move with strategic patience because all of history is watching. All of heaven is watching. And the entire future is waiting to see what you will do with the profound knowledge you now possess. The chains have been shattered. The memory has been fully restored. The time is now. This is no longer just a story from the past. The cycle has come full circle and the hour of reckoning and awakening is upon us. The time for action is now.